All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're tackling one of the most urgent challenges facing modern India, the battle for urban water. And believe me, this isn't just a story about dry taps. It's a story about conflict, about inequality, and a crisis that, as we're going to see, is often a crisis by design. So let's jump in. You know, this quote from a former Indian minister really cuts right to the heart of the issue. It frames the problem perfectly, doesn't it? This isn't just about a simple shortage of a natural resource. Nope. It's about a landscape of competing interests, where the struggle for water is creating these deep social and political cracks. So before we zero in on India, I think it's really important to zoom out for a second. We need to understand that this is all happening against a global backdrop of increasing water stress. This isn't some isolated problem, it's a worldwide challenge. And honestly, it's getting more intense every single year. I mean, just look at these numbers. The sheer scale of the problem is, well, it's staggering. We're talking about billions of people here. Can you imagine? 1.1 billion people today still can't get a clean glass of water. And by 2025, which is just around the corner, two-thirds of the entire global population will be living in places where water is scarce. So this is the global stage for the crisis that's unfolding in India. And that brings us right to the epicenter of this crisis, India. The numbers here are just stark. You've got a country with 18% of the world's population, but it only has access to 4% of the world's fresh water. That mismatch, that's really at the heart of the problem. Get ready for this number because it is a big one. 600 million people. That's nearly half of India's entire population. And that's how many people are facing high to extreme water stress right now. This isn't some far-off prediction, you know? This is the reality today for a massive, massive chunk of the country. And here's where the crisis gets even more complicated. It's not just about how much water there is. It's about the quality. A staggering 70% of all the available water in India is contaminated. So even when water is physically there, it's often way too dangerous to use, which just shrinks the pool of safe, usable water dramatically. So what you end up with is this really jarring paradox. You see these gleaming skyscrapers, these booming megacities, all these symbols of a rising economic superpower. But at the exact same time, water, something that should be a basic human right, is becoming a luxury good that millions just can't get. That contrast between modern progress and this basic struggle for survival is really where the conflict lives. This table, which comes from the government's own Water Management Index, shows just how widespread this challenge is. Just look at that low-performing category. You've got states like Uttar Pradesh and Delhi, some of the country's biggest economic and population hubs. This proves the problem isn't just out in the desert somewhere. It's a systemic failure of management right in the country's heartland. Okay, so this brings us to the core argument of our explainer. While things like weak monsoons definitely play a role, the urban water crisis in India is overwhelmingly a story of man-made scarcity. It's a crisis of governance, not just a crisis of nature. So let's be super clear about what we mean by man-made scarcity. It's when our own actions, like pumping out way too much groundwater, dumping untreated waste into rivers, and just a total lack of foresight in how we plan our cities, create a water shortage that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Or it makes a natural shortage way, way worse than it had to be. This slide just breaks it down perfectly. On one side, you have natural scarcity. Not enough rain. Simple enough. But on the other side, you have man-made scarcity, which is a crisis of management. It's about inefficient public utilities, the failure to treat wastewater, and just not being able to regulate who's taking how much water from the ground. And that is a really crucial difference. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look at two of India's biggest cities, Delhi and Chennai, to see exactly how these man-made pressures explode into open conflict. First up, the nation's capital, Delhi. Here, the main conflict is over access to water within the city itself. It's a story of a public system that's failing its own people, especially the most vulnerable. And that failure leads to a complete free-for-all. So when the public utility is just broken, strained by decades of underinvestment and aging pipes, and it can't provide enough water, we're talking as little as 27 liters per person per day in some slums, people don't just go thirsty, they adapt. They come up with what experts call compensatory strategies. If you have money, you just drill your own private well, which sucks the groundwater table dry for everyone else. A whole informal market of private water tankers starts to thrive. And if you're poor, You're probably resorting to illegal connections. It becomes this chaotic, unregulated system where every single person's individual solution just makes the collective problem so much worse. Okay, now let's head south to Chennai. Here, we see a totally different kind of conflict. It's not so much about access inside the city, but it's a battle for resources between the city and the surrounding rural areas that it absolutely depends on. Chennai's thirst has just gotten so huge that it can't sustain itself anymore. So what's the solution? Well, they transport massive amounts of water from the surrounding villages. And this creates a direct zero-sum conflict. To keep the taps flowing in the city, the water tables in these villages are literally being drained, threatening the farms and livelihoods that entire communities depend on for survival. It's urban growth coming at the direct expense of its rural neighbors. And as if this battle for every last drop wasn't bad enough, there's a parallel crisis of quality. The water that is available is often dangerously polluted, and that turns a scarcity problem into a full-blown public health catastrophe. And the pollution is at a crisis level. I mean, in Bengaluru, things have gotten so bad that the city's lakes have literally caught fire. Yeah, you heard that right. Lakes Bilandur and Varthur are now infamous for foaming over with toxic froth and then igniting, all because of the sheer volume of untreated industrial chemicals and raw sewage being dumped into them. It's a terrifying visual symbol of just how extreme water pollution can get. And it's not just Bengaluru. In North India, the Yamuna River, which is a critical water source for millions, is basically a toxic cocktail of heavy metals. We're talking lead, chromium, mercury, all at levels that are way, way above international safety standards. And this poison, it doesn't just stay in the river. It seeps into the groundwater and works its way right into the food chain. And the consequences just ripple outwards, touching every single part of society. Public health takes a massive hit, with about 21% of communicable diseases in India linked directly to unsafe water. Food security is threatened because desperate farmers have to use this contaminated wastewater for irrigation, which means our food ends up full of heavy metals. And it fuels social instability. Rural families whose wells have run dry are forced to migrate to the cities, putting even more pressure on already overburdened systems. It's a vicious cycle. So as we start to wrap this up, it's pretty clear that what's happening in India's cities isn't just a local story. It's really a cautionary tale for the future of urban life everywhere, in a world where resources are getting more and more scarce. Which leaves us with this final critical question. As our world becomes more and more urban, is this the future we're all headed for? A future where the survival of our biggest cities comes at the expense of everyone and everything around them, and where access to something as basic as clean water is a source of constant, bitter conflict? The experiences of cities like Delhi and Chennai suggest that unless there's a radical shift in how we govern and manage our water, the answer might be a deeply, deeply unsettling one.